Okay, this is Michael from Blue Sky Bio. I'm sorry we're getting started a few minutes late there. Some technical difficulties, but now we should be up and running. Tonight, we are continuing with the Blue Sky Bio 2018 webinar series. As usual, if you have questions during the webinar presentation, please enter them into the chat box. Tonight, we have the pleasure from hearing from Dr. Baron Grutter on the topic of advances in BlueSkyPlan and digital orthodontics. Baron?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Michael. So I'm bringing up the very first slide I have isn't really actually a slide. It's actually my website. The reason is because for this presentation, the last presentation I did on the ortho software was largely slide based. If anyone wants to go back to kind of see a little bit about that, it's on the Blue Sky Bio's YouTube channel, and you can find it right here. And it talks a lot about just aligners in general, and kind of why to do it, and or what the advantages are, and some of the perks of BlueSkyPlan. So I didn't want to recreate those same slides to kind of reinvent the wheel. I figure if you've already watched it, I don't want to bore you too much, but it's there for your reference if you'd like. Really what I'm going to be focusing on and is going to be just the updates in the software. And I wanted to have as much time for questions as possible. And not only that, but to go through some of the actual, if you will, tips and tricks that I use in the software that aren't as straightforward. So really, I'm going to jump right into the software. Michael will let me know if there's any questions. If I need to be interrupted at any time, that's fine. But for the most part, we're going to be doing everything right in the software. Slides don't seem to, in my opinion, don't offer a whole lot to this presentation. So also the case that I'm going to be presenting is actually the same case that I presented the first webinar on. The reason is in that webinar I focused on the design of her lower arch, and that's one of my hygienists. And sorry, I'm going to pull up this folder. So I'll go ahead and quickly just open up these two models, these STL models in Mesh Mixer, just to kind of give you an idea of the case I'm going to be working up. So anyway, I wanted to continue with this case for a couple reasons. One is the fact that it's the same one I did in the other webinar, but the opposite arch. I'm going to go ahead and append. And the other reason is the series of videos I made recently put on YouTube that walk you through one step, one phase at a time through the software is also on this case. So I just thought it made sense to stick with the same case so that we can, it's one that people are familiar with and can really translate it to work at home. And also the models for this case are available on Blue Sky Bio's website. So that way, again, if you're watching this later on, you can quite literally follow along, do the things I'm doing if you want, if that's the way you learn. But yeah, so anyway, this is the case that we're doing now. We've already aligned her lower models, lower teeth. She had very little alignment necessary, just a little bit of relapse on her lower anterior. And so the upper was really her main interest. She didn't like that carotid in the lower, but she really doesn't like the tooth that sticks out, the number 10 or upper left lateral incisor. What she also doesn't necessarily realize, to my eye, is it's more an issue of the central incisors that are tucked back. So again, I don't really want to focus this purely on treatment planning. We're really going to focus on the software, but to give you an idea of why I'm doing what I'm doing, you'll see that the key points in this case that I'm going to be working on are bringing this lateral incisor in a little bit, tipping these centrals out a little bit, and rotating this and the canine just a touch. Okay, so 5 teeth we're going to be addressing in this arch, and that's it. We're not going to worry about any sort of arch expansion or anything. That's not really addressing her chief complaint. So I won't focus too much on the small points because I'll kind of go through those quickly and focus on the changes. So first thing I'm going to do is bring in her model. Okay, and I'm going to, I do want to make sure you know that I can't remember if it's in the old version. It wasn't. No, actually, sorry, I do remember that. In the previous video, the previous webinar, the opposing arch was not integrated directly within the software. So as you're moving along, you really want to focus on walking through each one of these steps. So let's go ahead and bring in her final model. So that's the way right now. The software is one arch at a time. So what we do is we have planned the lower, we bring in the lower final model as the opposing, and then now we can align her upper to that lower. In a case like this, some people ask me, well, if you're going to do that, how do you know which arch to treatment plan first? In this case, I typically would do it backwards. I would do the other way around because she has no desire to do any sort of bonding or veneers on her upper teeth. So really we want to focus on getting her upper teeth as nice as possible, and then we will treat the lower to match those. Because that way if we have to do any IPR, well, and that will be addressed in the software in a little bit on one of the updates, but we can do the IPR in the lower. Now, if we know we're going to veneer the upper teeth, well, I would say plan the lower teeth, minimize the IPR, address the upper teeth. You may have spaces, but you'll be able to address that restoratively. So that's the first tip. Which arch do you treat first? Well, if you're doing it this way, if you're going to be doing restorative on the upper anterior, plan the lower first. If you're not planning any future restorative on the upper anterior, plan the upper first. Okay, so I'm going to hide this model because we don't need that for quite some time. Now I'm going to go ahead and call this the maxilla. Now, another thing is make sure you do name this for the patient. So, sorry, by doing this, it'll help to name the output files, and it'll help you to keep track of what your files are. So here's one of the big first updates from that video. Instead, we used to mark teeth, we used to have one dot right in the middle. Well, we now actually have 2 dots. And that's important because this tells the software the mesial and distal of the tooth. So it's important that you spend time doing this accurately. Do it on the incisal edge or the occlusal surface on the posterior teeth. Don't try to stick these down along the gum line, down mesial distal, one on the incisal edge, one on the gingival. It's important that you place them mesial distal and as high up on the teeth or centered in the teeth. So we've finished that side. If you're missing a premolar, just right click, it'll leave a blue dot. It's just going to ignore it. Now I've called that a molar, but regardless, that's the point. That way it knows to skip a tooth. Because the movement limits of each of our teeth, the incise, every single one of these teeth has a different rate at which it can move. And so you don't want to inadvertently call a molar a premolar, because as it tries to, if you try to move that tooth, the software will think it can move faster than it can. And that will likely run you into problems during treatment. So once we've finished marking, we are going to, the model is open, as with most optical models. So we're going to close the model. Now, in the past, in some of my older videos, if you've watched my videos on YouTube, I used to base the models in Mesh Mixer and do all sorts of other things. I don't do that anymore. I found that the models generated directly from BlueSkyPlan actually are the best I've come up with, or I haven't come up with, that I get. One of the nice things is they print predictably, but they also, in the software moves the fastest. So even if you have a software like, for instance, CEREC InLab has the ability to export a model that is based. The problem is the geometry on the underside, the hollow side, tends to slow down the processing of the software. So do yourself a favor, bring in the open mesh, close it in here. Okay, this is one of the, like I said, this step right here, when I would base the models outside, this step would take much, much longer. Okay, so now is when you get the little pastel teeth. And my first tip that I recommend is that you stay on one surface. Work along the buccal. You have 2 different ways to affect the line. One is to just draw it, and one is to move each individual node as necessary. Do not linger on this step. If you are a CAD/CAM user like CEREC, PlanScan, or any of the other softwares where you have to draw margins, you are used to having to get very, very precise because we're talking about restorative margins. But what we're telling the software here is what is gingiva and what is tooth, what is immobile and what is mobile. So if you accidentally capture a little bit of the gingiva, all that's going to do is it's going to tell the software that, okay, that piece of gingiva cannot stretch or skew. It's only going to move rigidly. That really won't affect treatment. So I would rather overestimate, than underestimate, although neither one is going to be a big deal. So just get through this step. This is a step that in my office I delegate to one of my team members, one of my assistants, and they will get this step processed before I come in. In fact, they'll actually do some of the tooth alignment as well, so that I can just refine things a little bit. Okay, now if you're not moving a tooth, the tendency is to ignore that tooth. Don't do that. If you leave a line through the middle of the occlusal surface of a posterior tooth, it can cause issues when printing. And you can ask me how I know. It got me at the very beginning phases of this. So just draw, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're not going to move these teeth. I don't even have to mess with this because really I'm not moving that tooth. My attention to detail made me do that. It probably was unnecessary. I'm not moving this tooth. I really shouldn't even mess with that. But I am going to be moving this tooth. So any tooth you're going to be moving and the teeth immediately adjacent, I recommend really refining, or not really, but getting them pretty close to ideal on those lines. And the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the line never disappears over the incisal embrasures. Just make sure you bring up one of these nodes so that it crosses that line. Otherwise, you can have some segmentation errors. Segmentation meaning as the software tries to separate the teeth into individual segments, or teeth in our case, if you have the lines disappear, it doesn't know where to cut above that line. So you're just introducing error. So I always just go to typically the buccal, grab the highest one up, and just bring it over top. If the lines overlap, you want them to be coincident if possible, right in line with each other. If they overlap a little bit, you're essentially telling the software that they're already overlapping, and it will tell you that there's IPR being done right then before you even move teeth. Not a big deal if you know that, but if you ignore that fact, it can cause you some grief. Okay, so that is it for the segmentation. One of the sorry, I wanted to make sure that, oh yeah, so the next step in this, sorry, I was checking my notes. In this step, this phase of the treatment, the one big addition is the ability to set teeth as static or active. I don't recommend clicking the little radio buttons down here. You can instead come up to this or the teeth on the actual 3D model and just right click. Any tooth you don't plan to move, go ahead and right click. What that's going to do is the software still knows that's a tooth structure. It will help with IPR calculations, but it's not actually going to move, so it doesn't have to do as much processing. So go ahead and ignore those teeth, and we're just going to keep these teeth, these 5 teeth that we plan to align, active. Once again, this is the next big step, and there's really just those 2 steps that would take a while when you have a closed model, a pre-closed model. And that was also the step when I would typically go grab a cup of coffee. Okay, so one of the first things that you won't see on my desktop, my computer pop up, because I've already given it the okay. I've already defined this one parameter. Once this is done initializing, I will show you this. The software now inflates the tissue ever so slightly. We found that a very minor inflation, minimum of 0.2 of a millimeter, helps with tissue irritation, but also helps with model printing. It keeps the models from being as irregular along the tooth borders, gingival margins. So what's going to happen on your screen is you're going to come up to, you're going to have a little screen that pops up. It's going to ask you the gingival augmentation amount. And you're going to have the option of 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, and 0.8. I can't really see any need for 0.8, but we did do some kind of survey into some of our bigger users and asked what would help. And so these are the options we gave. So anyway, 0.2 is where I leave it. And so once you set that, it won't pop up again. If you reinstall the software, of course, it will ask you again. Okay, so that's the first thing, one of the updates in this screen, in this phase, if you will. So now we're going to do the, I want to show you that as I mentioned before, when you put the dots, that's how it knows how to align these lines, okay? Or this, as we call it, the pivot. So if you don't put the dots right, it doesn't know how to align it up. That used to be an issue with the software. It didn't understand, and it had to just guess, and it was maybe right 50% of the time. Okay, so coming through here, anything that's been added over here, one of the things, let's go ahead and just for demonstration purposes, let's move this tooth way out here. Let's rotate it. And say we want to see where the tooth originally was. We can now click on initial position, and it will show where that tooth was. So we can kind of see the amount of travel it's done. So this is a helpful thing, just to remind yourself, as opposed to having to reset the tooth. However, if you have reset the tooth, you can always undo, and you didn't mean to. So anyway, keep in mind, Control Z or the little back arrow is very important as you're using the software. Okay, so the next big thing, in my opinion, is the ability to now adjust our pivot. Before, we were stuck with this and we just had to align the teeth. And sometimes, if it's, as you can tell, this is where the root of this tooth is, it's just not quite right. So if we click on Adjust Pivot, the whole pivot becomes sort of dark. And now we can realign it to the long axis, put it back here. But not only that, as it stands, if I tick this off, when I rotate my tooth, it rotates right about this center rotation, which really is essentially torquing the root significantly. So the very first thing I do, let's go ahead and reset that tooth, is I go ahead and click Adjust Pivot after I've aligned it, and I bring it down a ways, so that on this lateral incisors, I probably go to the middle third of the tooth. And this is one of the updates that is coming. We have now put together a process that actually pre-calculates this, brings it down farther on each tooth. So don't worry, it's a very soon update. You won't have to mess with this, but it's a quick process, not a big deal. Take about 20 seconds to do it for all 5 teeth, and it will make the overall alignment of teeth much more efficient, in my experience. Okay, let's bring that up here. And then the last one would be the canine. Because it's a nice round tooth, I like to look down here to make sure it doesn't need to be rotated this way. Rock it back, slide it back, and bring it deeper. Okay. Now, if all you're doing is rotating the tooth, you really don't need to mess with that. For instance, this canine, I'm not planning to tip or torque the tooth. I'm only going to rotate it. So really doing that adjustment is unnecessary, but it's habit for me. So again, skip it if you don't want to, but from now on, every other step is very easy. Okay, so that's the rest. That's it for the setup. Now we just need to move the teeth where we want to. So I'm going to do this kind of quickly because this isn't really what the purpose of this webinar is to say about. I tend to work from the outside in. And let's go ahead and we can show that opposing tooth to make sure that none of our movements are going to interfere with occlusion. Rock that forward a little bit, and I'll also show you how to check occlusion in a moment. Control Z, and just a little bit. And so I actually did end up tipping it just a touch, so it's probably not a bad idea that I did mess with the pivot a little bit. Okay, so let's go to central incisors, and it's slightly in contact there. So I'm going to tip it back a little bit. I've got the freeway space I want. Click on another tooth and you can really see through there. Let's make that tooth match. One thing I do notice is this tooth needs to rotate just a touch. And then probably swing a little bit to the mesial. And this tooth is going to intrude just a touch. Okay? Now the big tooth, the big challenge tooth is without a doubt this lateral incisor. Now, but keep in mind the kind of movements you're trying to do with teeth, because when you start torquing roots is when you start having much longer treatment times. And that's okay if that's what you need to accomplish, but it is something to bear in mind. Now, another thing I skipped mentioning, but it is important, is IPR calculations. That was not active in the last webinar. And so now you can see active IPR calculations, and you can determine what is appropriate. Just for reference, I set my at 0.05 and 0.05. that is the point at which the numbers show up. The default currently, I believe, is 0.3 and 0.5, or it might even be 0.5 and 0.5. I would recommend dialing that down just a touch. We will change that default in a very soon update. Okay, so we've got the tooth fairly well positioned. Now there is, I would say, excessive IPR back here. So I'm going to try to correct it, because I'm actually going to torque the root on this tooth a little bit just to show you what that looks like in the software. Not every patient is it going to be worth the amount of time if they're just looking for an aesthetic improvement and you really don't want to spend that much time torquing that root. But for the sake of the webinar, I think it will be helpful. Okay, so we've got some IPR, a little more than I'd like to do. I'd like to keep it closer to 2/10, but we're going to go ahead and move forward with it in this case as is. Okay, so if I want to get rid of this pivot so it's not obscuring my view, just click on one of the static teeth, and let's hide the IPR. And this is our final alignment that we're aiming for. If we want to see the initial position, there it is. And let's go ahead and hide that. So now we have to decide how often we want to swap out trays. I will tell you up front, I tend to pick biweekly, and most of my patients, I have them wear them once a week. The movement I have found to track even faster than we had anticipated, but not all cases. Cases with difficult movements, this lateral incisor, I might opt to stick with the 2 weeks for each tray. Okay, let's go ahead and edit the steps. And so here are my number of steps. Okay. So one of the things to keep in mind that is, I believe, in the courses I teach, I find it's very underutilized, so I tend to really hammer home. Use the alignment head down here. Centers it pretty quickly and easily if you want to see from the occlusal. It's a good way to get you kind of back to home as you're moving the model around. Okay, so this is this next thing I want to mention isn't an update to the software, but more to an update to how I treatment plan and some of the features that have been there, but we haven't really talked about in the videos in the past. And that is this first column, the start step, the step at which teeth begin to move. Okay, so if you look at this lateral incisor, if we watch, it starts to rotate right away. Every single tooth rotates from moves from the very beginning. If it's going to move, it's going to start moving at the very beginning. Well, there are times when you would like to wait to move a tooth until you've finished moving another tooth. So, for instance, go ahead and say that this canine, if we watch this canine, it stops moving at the 8th step. So it only needs 8 steps to move, which means it could also start at the 9th step right here. Click refresh steps. And what will happen is it won't move until then, and it finishes moving at the very end. So just keep that in mind. If things get in the way, that will help you. Now, this case really doesn't need much of that alteration. I wanted to show it as a demonstration, but it is not really necessary in this case. What is necessary, however, is if we turn on the IPR and we watch this, you'll notice that it gets into a significant IPR range, 98 or 98 hundredths, almost a millimeter, before it continues on to its final position, at which there's just 3/10. Okay, so how do we avoid that? We don't want that to occur. Well, the trick that I have, it takes a couple little tweaks, but I go to the very highest amount of IPR, and I move the tooth right here. And if I knew that there was about 0.4 of a millimeter of anticipated IPR on the mesial, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it all the way to there, and maybe out just a touch. Get those numbers to the similar with what I'm okay with in the final position. Click refresh steps. Sometimes that refresh can add steps, because what we're going to be doing is going to move out to that position before it finishes its complete movement. And now you can see that the final IPR values of 0.4 and 3.5 Let's see if it ever gets above that. 0.45, it's a touch above. Don't love that, but we'll see if it gets any worse. 0.48, 0.46 starts dialing down. And so the worst, again, you might be, I would probably just leave it as is here, but if you really want to improve it again, you can just slide it to get past that or get away from that 0.48. Maybe come to here, click refresh steps, and now it never gets to that high 0.4 value. So anyway, that's a step that is, that is a process which again takes about a minute or two to refine if necessary. Takes me longer to demonstrate, of course, but just to help keep things from interfering with one another. One step that we'll be adding, or one aspect we'll be adding is this right over here, this mandatory column. It's going to be changing to static. So if you want a tooth to move and then stop, hold still while other teeth are moving, you're going to be able to click on the tooth and click on a static step so that that tooth stops moving during that time period. Anyway, that's about that. So the next thing is that we didn't cover in the last version of software was buttons. And in the past, we would create buttons in Mesh Mixer on their initial model before we brought it into BlueSkyPlan. But now we can add buttons. So right down here where we click, we want to add buttons or brackets. Right now down here, there's a design aligners checkbox. Leave it unchecked. We don't have materials yet that we can print our aligners with. You can try, but it's just not going to work well. And the amount of post-print processing, meaning if you printed your aligner, you designed them and printed them, the amount of polishing it would take to get it to an acceptable level is just too much. So just until we have some materials and some processes that help that out, this is here, it's waiting for us, it's waiting for the materials. The utility is built into the software, but just leave it alone for now. So now we're going to add buttons. The buttons right now, I'm going to go ahead and right click on it too. Actually, let's go back for a second. We need to figure out what buttons we need to add. So first of all, a canine that's going to rotate, you need a button on. And if you're going to intrude a tooth, you need buttons on the adjacent teeth. If you're going to extrude a tooth, you need a button on that tooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a button on both canines to help hold the tray in as we're intruding this central. I'm going to add one more button on this central to help with that intrusion, and then I'm going to add one button on the canine to help its rotation. So 3 buttons: canine, upper left central, and canine. This lateral, well, actually, it will need a button as well because of the torquing motion. It's not real severe, but right at the very end, if we want that to actually occur. The rotation, I'm not worried about a button. It's a big flat tooth. It's got plenty of surface area for the rotation. It's the sweeping of that root that's going to be more challenging. Okay, so it brings you the final model. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this canine. Click add button. Now for now we have these three buttons. We have a number of other buttons to add: a wedge for extrusion, and then also a more elliptical button to help with torquing of roots, and some other reasons as well. And then we also have a metal button that would be more for using for elastics. So, but for now, I'm going to show you this one. I'm going to put on large, and here's my button. I can expand it in height. I'm going to do that right quick. Bring it down. And I like to intrude it within the tooth so that when it prints, I have no doubt that it's going to be adhered to the tooth. Okay, so that one's done. I like the size of that one. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to hit duplicate, and I'm going to click on this canine. Now I am going to bring this up a little bit farther. Left it a little bit low. I like to align it to the long axis of the tooth. And then I'm going to submerge it just a little bit into this canine. Okay, so these buttons will help with tray retention, but it's the biggest reason I'm using it is to help with the rotation of that canine. Now I'm trying to intrude this central incisor. Hopefully these buttons will help, but I'm also going to put a button on this central right here. I'm going to use the same button, but I'm going to put it right about here, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Now, you will have the potential of extruding this tooth at the same time because as Newton's third law says, I believe it's the third law, I shouldn't have said that out loud, for each and every action there's an equal opposite reaction, I believe. Well, anyway, the point being, you try to intrude this tooth, you're going to potentially extrude this tooth. But with the added anchorage of 3 teeth, you should minimize any extrusion or extrusion and get primarily intrusion of that tooth. Okay, so that's it for that. And the last thing is going to be for this lateral incisor. Now, you can use the triangular buttons for this, and that's what I have done in the past, but I will be transitioning to the more sliced elliptical button that we will be adding very soon. Okay. And I'm going to add one more button, the same thing. If I just click duplicate, here it is. Let's rotate, submerge it. These buttons, these triangular buttons, can be tricky if you make them too tall. They get a little bit too much force. They're a little more prone to popping off the teeth. So do yourself a favor, submerge them in a little bit, and that should be good. Okay, so yeah, we're going to move forward. Okay, so now, because we named the patient at the very beginning, up here in the label text is right here. I'm going to click on Show Label, and the very first number that you see pop up is 0, because if you look, I'm going to go ahead and hide that for a moment here, is as I slide through here, the very first model is going to be my template model, the model with which I'm going to use to add my buttons to the teeth. So bring it in here, click Apply, and this will apply to every single model. Now this takes a little while because it does have to emboss the text on every single model. While this is happening, I want to talk a little bit about the next thing, and that is going to be, oh, it's done. Here's all the numbers. If you turn it to the side, you can see. If you want, you can show the label again, delete the name, and some people like to put the number on the actual teeth. That way, when they make their tray, it ends up with the plastic being essentially wrapping around the embossed number, and so they know that what number the tray is. I used to do that. Don't do it so much anymore, but not for any real reason. I just don't, and I haven't needed it. So I guess my assistants will let me know if they want me to start doing that again. Okay, so we've gone through the aligner software, and how does this if you're just wanting to do brackets, well, does that mean this software doesn't work for you? Well, no. It's actually still really helpful, because what we're going to do now to do brackets, you've already learned the process of aligning teeth. So let's go back for a second. And instead, though, of adding buttons, we're instead going to add brackets. Okay, so click on that. Also, we want to design our indirect bonding trays. Click OK. And so now it's going to give us the option. It's the same thing, it's the same process as it was before, as adding buttons. But I'm just going to click right where I want the bracket centered. Click Add Bracket. As up here is when we're going to have your bracket selection. I'm going to stick with this one for now. Here's the central. Come over here to add bracket. Now we will be adding some updates as well to this, as with other things, where the brackets will actually come in alignment with one another. Right now, they are all aligned to the long axis of the environment, so that there is, so that the torque is sort of already built in. So the idea being when you use a shape memory like a nickel titanium wire, you're going to, as it returns to its ideal position, the bracket will move as well, will move the entire tooth to where it needs to be. So you just position the teeth where you want them, where you feel aligned is. Try to move through here a little more quickly now. So a little tip, until we have it to automatically align them and basically snapping to a wire, just look right down the line, you'll see them line up. I'm very excited about adding the part where it does all that for you, but for now, this is still a huge time save for me because it's so much easier for me to align the brackets, make sure they're aligned on a computer screen than it is for me to do so in the mouth. So again, this is something that if you're going to use this, I would even say that you even need to spend less time with the margination or the segmentation of the teeth, because we're really, the only model that's going to matter to us is the final model, okay? Because the final model is going to be the teeth within their malaligned positions with the brackets where they need to be, and then the tray is made from there. Now, I'm going to warn you, there is one, right now the step is going to ask to create the tray on every single model. That's a known glitch that will be fixed very soon, but I just want to give you that heads up. That's a time where you walk away. What I'm doing to draw this line, I'm pressing and holding the shift button. This is the same as drawing a surgical guideline for those that are familiar. Click edit curve. You can change it if you want. Looks pretty good to me. And now this is what's going to take a while, because it's going to generate an aligner on each of these 19 trays. So right now, I think would be a good time while we wait for this. If Michael's okay with it, if there's any questions, now would probably be a good time to answer those questions, if there are any.
Let's take a look. Somebody wrote in, can the software do a mid-treatment evaluation and merge in an actual patient's teeth scan in mid-treatment and merge it to mid-treatment model?
Great question. Okay. Yes, you could do that. Yes, you could use that. Honestly, it's not built into the ortho software, but if you were to open up the surgical guide software, open up any of the output models that you created in the the models that we would export from here for printing, open it up in the surgical guide software, and then use the align to model tool. You could use cus tips and various other anatomic points to align the models, and then you would see how well they're aligned. It's just for visual. Yes, that would be super easy to do.
Okay. In your opinion, how long do retainers last at the end of treatment?
Okay, so I guess that depends on the kind of patient you have, if they're a bruxer or not. I use Essex C+ material for my final retainers. I know some people that use Endura, or I do have a few patients that are very serious bruxers, and I still get them a Holly retainer for final retention. The advantage of Holly retainers over aligner end retainers, no matter what system you're using, is that they actually allow for bite settling. If you're using an aligner, you're still introducing that sort of wedge effect by having aligners over top of the posterior teeth indefinitely, at least overnight. So yeah, but to answer the question, I tell patients that I usually just include 2 to 3, depending on the patient, and they should last a couple years.
Okay. If there are questions, please enter them into the chat box. And while this is processing, I could just say that everybody should join that Blue Sky Bio user group. We are going to be rolling out a lot of new features and development builds and functionality, and that user group is where we're going to be putting up the information regarding how to access that. If you're interested how to start using early beta releases, we're going to have one in the next day or two coming up regarding denture functionality. So if you're not in the Facebook group for Blue Sky Bio users, please go ahead and join that group. And same with the ortho functionality, the ortho module, something that's still being worked on, still being developed. Baron mentioned some of the new functionality that we're going to be adding, and there's a whole lot more that's going to be coming as well. So as we come out with the new releases, we're going to be putting out the information there on that Facebook Blue Sky Bio user group.
Yeah, I didn't mention dual arch treatment, but that's also right around the corner. So right now, I honestly, and I've kind of maintained this, I don't really, it doesn't bother me that I have to treat, or not treat, I have to plan one arch at a time because it keeps me focused, keeps me from bouncing from arch to arch. But at the same time, I know there's a lot of desire for that, and that is right around the corner. I would love to put a timeline on it, but it should be very soon. That's not my department. One thing I will mention, and just because for anyone that's looking, is seeing this and is intrigued, interested, and wants to see what it would look like, there are other things that you'll need to invest in, and there's things like a printer. Unless you're outsourcing your printing, you'll need a machine to make your aligners. We do recommend positive pressure as opposed to a traditional suck down, because the suck downs just don't quite adapt as well. You won't get the same adaptation around the teeth and as efficient a movement. So a positive pressure machine, there's a number of them out there, like the Mini Star from Great Lakes Ortho, the Drew Format from Raintree Essex, and there's a few others as well. So, but I also just I hope that's okay. I'm going to bring you to my website only because I have a lot of things that. If you're interested in what things I use for separating my models, I have a spray or separating my aligners from models, for cutting the trays. There's various things and just different tools that I use, and I try to also put other videos. For instance, Barry Volts, who is really helpful online with both printing. If you don't want to outsource your printing, he's put out a video that's great for how to make your aligners, and he uses scissors and a scalpel as opposed to a saw. So there's different ways to do that. It's a big community of people all kind of helping each other. So if you need some of those instruments you're looking, just a free resource for the kind of things that I use. I try to keep it updated. In addition to packaging, that's a big question I get often. How do you package these for patient presentation? We use a label maker. We use little Mylar bags, slide the bags in with the label that has our office logo on it and name, and then we seal the bag, and it keeps everything organized well, and it looks pretty nice. So that's that. And if you are looking to learn more about aligners and the mechanics of aligners, yes, I have courses, and I'd be happy to teach you. But there's also a great book. It's based on Invisalign, but it's really just about plastic. It's just talking about how to move teeth with plastic. And how teeth will respond. So it's a great resource as well if you're just getting into it. So yeah, and so here is the final output. So you can see the teeth move and the aligners. You wouldn't need all these because really we only need the final one. But just so you kind of see that is the final tray. Now, yeah, I think that's about it. Are there any other questions, Michael?
Yeah. Can we close spacing like closing a diastema?
Yeah. So yes. So closing diastemas is challenging with aligners. Far more challenging than brackets. So what does that mean, and how do you make it happen? So the way I showed those buttons on the lateral for torquing the root, it's the same kind of thing you would do with brackets. So what I mean by that is with brackets, quite often if you're trying to close space, you'll actually over torque the bracket. I can't show that real well. I'm just going to go ahead and go back. Hopefully, I don't need this. Well, sure. Let me open that folder up. Let me open up one of these models. So just so I can kind of show you what I mean, if you're trying to close space with a bracketed on a bracketed patient, it's common to take these brackets and overcorrect them. So that what happens is as you use a power chain, sorry. So as you use a power chain, use, sorry for the first. Okay, so if you had a diastema here and you use a power chain, it's not going to just tip the teeth, it's going to sweep the roots, mesial, distal. Okay, or it's going to sweep them together. Well, the same thing with buttons, you overcorrect. I showed those two triangular buttons that I would use to sweep this root. The same thing. If you're trying to close a diastema, you need to overcorrect those teeth. You need to pretend that you're bringing them kind of pigeon-toed, the roots too close together, so that you're overcorrecting and the treatment won't, your teeth will always lag just a little behind in plastic. But the same way with the brackets. So yes, you can close diastemas. If they're large diastemas, hopefully you're going to get most of the closure through retraction. But if you're not retracting, if they aren't flared teeth and you just have space, it is much more challenging, but it is possible. Pull up one, or actually I don't want that one. So, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. They're all going to look the same. So here's what the bracket tray looks like. And so you can slide the brackets in. I recommend printing this in Ortho IBT resin. It is a clear, flexible resin. It's great because you can cure through it, but also it's flexible, so it peels off very easily, and I don't segment it a lot. The traditional way to do IBT trays is to segment either in quadrants or sectants, but I actually can peel the entire thing off at one time. Okay, what else? Is that it, Michael?
There's some of the additional functionality that we actually have in the software that users should be aware of. It exists. So regarding the virtual tooth, for example, that you're actually able to align a virtual tooth with the roots to the teeth, so that when you then move the tooth, you're pivoting the tooth together with the virtual tooth with the root, which will help visualize how that's going to affect the planning.
Yep, and if I come back, I can actually show that right quick. I did talk about that a little bit in my last video, but to demonstrate, if we click right back here to the initial alignment phase, I'm sorry, I went too far back. Yeah, at the very bottom, you can add a virtual tooth. And so you'll see the actual root sweep and the torque of the root, so you can see how much movement you're getting. You can even use that within the CT overlay to see if you have bone to move that root into.
I posted the link in the chat box for the webinar attendance form, so please make sure to enter your details there so that we can send you the CE credit. The CE credit usually arrives via email within a week or so of the webinar presentation. Baron, a question came in now. What 3D printer do you use for the ortho IBT material? Baron, did we lose you?
Hello?
Yeah.
All right, did we finish? I lost my internet dropped.
No, we're still presenting.
Okay. Yeah, my everything dropped on me. Sorry. Any other questions?
Yeah. We're just discussing a question. What 3D printer do you use for the ortho IBT material?
The only one I know of that currently has a profile built in the software is the Moonray, the Moonray S. So Sprint Ray, Moonray S.
Okay. In your opinion, what are the limitations for aligner therapy using Blue Sky Bio, using BlueSkyPlan?
Okay, so there's two possibilities for that question. Are there limitations for it over using another aligner system? I haven't found any. I do all of my aligner cases with BlueSkyPlan. Now, do I recommend everyone jump in, the deep end like that? I mean, it's up to you at your comfort level, but the software works as effectively as I need it. Now, do I treat every case with aligners? No, but that's a whole different question. I feel that most cases can be treated with aligners, but there's still, anyway.
Okay. Which ortho IBT material are you using?
Nextdent Ortho IBT. Nextdent is the brand. Sorry. Nextdent. Yeah, I'm sorry. My internet is really okay. Here we go. So yeah, Nextdent Ortho IBT, and I know that Sprint Ray was selling it. I don't know if they still are or not, but that's who I've gotten it from.
Okay, I think that I'm hearing Sprint Ray is back order than most of the resins. Is there any other place to order from?
Well, yes, yes, you can actually buy your resin through Blue Sky Bio as well. I don't know, as far as I know, they still have stock, but I know that they sold a ton, and that's why they ran out. Couple of the meetings, the midwinter and whatnot, they sold so many printers and so much resin that they got few more orders than they expected. So I'm sure they'll get caught up soon. But yeah, I know that Blue Sky Bio carries it. As far as I know, they're still in stock, and then also you can get it through Patterson. Yeah.
Okay, a couple of questions are coming in now regarding the bracket library. Do you want to discuss what we have now in the software?
Yeah. So right now we have. I'll just show you. Well, so okay. Right now we have we're working with metal brackets, traditional brackets, passive self-ligating. Here, I'll just show you so you can see the company we partnered with. We partner with North American Braces for now, and for now, those for now will be the brackets that we have in the library. Right now, it's actually just the olive, which is the basic solid metal bracket, but we're also putting the passive self-ligating, the active self-ligating, the passive self-ligating, the active ceramic, and then also their jewel sapphire bracket. So I think we have, what is that, six, 5 different brackets, 5 different bracket lines, both the Roth line and the oh gosh, I'm blanking. I use Roth primarily. Anyway, those 2 lines, and we are also working with getting other bracket lines. The same way with the implant software, MBT, sorry. The same way with implants. Right now, when BlueSkyPlan first launched their software, or Blue Sky Bio first launched the BlueSkyPlan software, it was just the BlueSkyPlan implants until the various implant companies understood that the value to have their implants in the BlueSkyPlan software. So we will continue to add other bracket lines as we gain interest from those bracket companies, and hopefully we've actually already begun talks with a few other of the big hitters out there in the bracket lines. So hopefully we'll have a lot of brackets in this near future.
Okay. There are a couple more questions. Let's just do one last question regarding the Formlabs flexible resin. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. Okay. They have two resins that would look outwardly appealing. One is the flexible, and one is the durable. Flexible is I wouldn't use at all. It's gray and it crumbles, it cracks. It's not a bad resin, but not for what we use. I've printed stuff outside dentistry. I've printed stuff for dentistry, and it tends to crumble. They also have their durable resin, which is clear. So outwardly it seems intriguing. The problem is it's not it's not an intraoral material, so I wouldn't recommend using that based on the need FDA type. I can't recommend using that. I've never even bothered to try even on a model just because I think it's kind of pointless.
Okay. We have information regarding our upcoming webinar presentations on BlueSkyPlan.com. You can also access from there past recorded presentations. This presentation is being recorded as well and will be available via the BlueSkyPlan.com website and will be accessible on YouTube as well. Again, enter your information to the webinar attendance form so we can send you those CE credits. And Baron, thank you very much for taking time to provide the presentation, and thank you for your ongoing contribution and input regarding development of the software. And I know we're always trying to catch up to everything that all your ideas, and we're getting there, and we will get there. But thank you very much for everything involved.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And I'd like to thank everybody who attended the presentation, and we hope to see you in one of our upcoming presentations as well.